Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder. And today we're going to discuss the era of immigration after the U.S. Civil War and what made this era different from previous eras of immigration. Learning targets, we'll talk about what makes these immigrants new. We'll talk about the push and pull factors, about why they came to America, the challenges that they faced on the journey to America, and the challenges once they got here, and how they adapt to American life while contributing to our culture. So what makes this era of immigration new? Well, up until the Civil War, including the founding of our nation until the Civil War, majority of the immigrants were coming from Northern and Western Europe, such as Irish Catholics, German Protestants, and these people aren't as discriminated against because Irish speak English just like we do, and Protestant Germans turn out to be very, very good workers as a whole, as a stereotype, so they're not as discriminated against. Starting after the Civil War, we see a dramatic rise in the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, and by 1900 they make up 70% of all immigrants. These people are mostly Eastern Catholics as opposed to Roman Western Catholics, and Jewish, and they come from places like Italy, Greece, Poland, Hungary, and Russia. Most of them are poor and unskilled, means they can only live in cities and do unskilled labor at some sort of factory. Some of them even plan to earn money here and then return home. Their different cultures and languages brought discrimination against these groups of people. So what were some of the push versus pull factors? A push factor is something that is pushing someone out of their country. It compels them to leave their homes. Things like religious or political persecution, economic hardship, just like farmers are losing their jobs here in America. A lot of them are losing their jobs elsewhere because of low crop prices or low land values. Lack of jobs elsewhere, and war or political upheavals are also pushing people to come here, especially in Eastern Europe and Russia. A pull factor means that it's something that's pulling them into America because a better life is waiting here. Here they could have religious or political freedom. Cheap land is available because of something called the Homestead Act, which we'll discuss in another lesson. There's factory jobs, which means you don't really have to have a skill. And some of them, called chain immigrants, may already have family here in the U.S. that they can join fairly easily. So what was coming to America like? Well, immigrants traveled in steerage, or the crowded, dirty lower decks of the steamships, and there's not any private cabins, so they're all just living sort of in one large room together. They could only bring what they could carry, which might include a photograph, a suitcase of clothing, basically just what is extremely important to them because they have to leave everything else behind. Even though they did health screenings at the port where they were leaving from, illness was rampant and spread very quickly among these tight quarters, and some people who appeared healthy became sick. If there were storms, you couldn't go out onto the upper deck, which means seasick passengers were stuck in steerage. Some people died in steerage if they were very frail when they started. Once they get to America, they have to prove that they are healthy and that they have either a skill, money, or a sponsor who could provide for them. Most third-class steerage immigrants are processed at Ellis Island beginning in 1892, and that's in New York Harbor. So they sail into New York Harbor, they see the Statue of Liberty. It's very, very moving for them, and it provides them hope that they're going to have a better life. Immigrant officials here conduct legal and medical inspections. Only about 2% are denied entry because probably they were already screened when they left whatever country they were leaving from. Chinese and Asian immigrants traveling across the Pacific Ocean are processed at Angel Island in San Francisco Bay in 1910. And due to racism and something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which we'll talk about in a second, the Chinese had to prove that they are American citizens or they have relatives living in America waiting for them. Otherwise, they were turned back. We didn't want Chinese here in America. Sometimes at Ellis and Angel Island, they could be held for weeks in quarantine and usually European immigrants are held for just hours, but there are some exceptions to that rule. But still, due to racism, they're held there for weeks, and they aren't let go until, for a variety of reasons, but it's all due to discrimination because they aren't white. And speaking of white versus not white, volunteer organizations run by settlement houses in these cities they're moving to set up Americanization programs to help these people learn English and adopt American customs. So these workers and immigrants felt America is a melting pot, which means that white people of all different cultures blend together to form one distinct culture. And notice I said white people. They're not accepting blacks or Asians or other non-white people. And nativists are the opposite side of that. Nativism is the idea that native-born white Americans are superior to immigrants. But the I can't think of the word. But so with these new immigrants, there is competition for jobs and housing, and that fuels resentment toward immigrants. Why should they have the job? They're just getting here. Why are they willing to work for lower wages? So that sparks resentment toward immigrants. Religious and cultural differences and tight quarters in the city sparks suspicion between these groups. And scientists even create studies during this time, during the social Darwinism era, on how immigrants' physical characteristics are linked to lower intelligence and even criminal behavior. Now, obviously, that's not true, but it is a way for them to discriminate against these immigrants coming into what the nativists feel is take their housing and take their jobs. Living conditions. The cities mean that these poor immigrants aren't going to be able to live in the suburbs and travel to work. They have to live within walking distance. So they have to live near their low-skill industrial job. And a lot of times, a group of these immigrants would get together in ethnic neighborhoods called ghettos with other people from their country. And this makes them more comfortable by having a familiar language, food, clothing shops. These places are still around. If you go to the cities, you may see a part. Chinatown would be an example. Little Italy is an example in Chicago of these ethnic neighborhoods. Keeping foreigners out, you can see these rich people. I guess I still can't think of that word though. You can see the shadows behind these people mean that these nativists were once immigrants, or their ancestors were immigrants, and now they aren't letting immigrants come over to help other people out. Like we said, Chinese immigrants are not allowed in after 1882 due to the Chinese Exclusion Act. This actually has a negative effect on California and other places where Chinese labor was needed for the industry, but it also limits the civil rights of the Chinese that are already here and forbids their naturalization. Now, eventually, the Supreme Court rules that we cannot take away a Chinese person's citizenship if they were born here due to the 14th Amendment. And the lasting effects of immigration are basically they change what it means to be American. Their labor helps fuel industrial growth, which makes America a world economic power despite the harsh conditions they had to work in. Their votes help elect politicians to give them a voice in politics, and their traditions become a part of American culture. And during that time, they also are active in labor unions, and so they get a voice. A lot of famous immigrants go on to make inventions. Samuel Gompers was the leader of a labor union. He was a immigrant. Alexander Graham Bell, Andrew Carnegie, Joseph Pulitzer was also an immigrant, the newspaper owner. So a lot of these people go on to change what it means to be American, and immigration does affect America in a large way. That's all I have for you today. Make sure you fill out those learning targets. I'm going to think of that word, and I'll let you know what it was, and we'll talk about this in class tomorrow. Bye-bye.